Every Canada Day weekend, the town of Raymond, Alberta has a double celebration. Of course, it's Canada Day, and it's also Raymond Heritage Days, along with the Raymond Stampede Rodeo. Today, we're going to chat a bit about this year's event, but we also want to talk about the history of Raymond, Alberta. So joining us today is Ron McMullin. He is the president of the Raymond Historical Society. Ron, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Now, Raymond is famous for its annual parade and also for its Stampede Rodeo because it is, in fact, the very first Stampede in Canada. So can you give us a brief history of when and how this rodeo came to be?
Yes, I can. Raymond Knight was the one who started the first Stampede. He managed a large ranch for his father, Jesse Knight, over 220,000 acres of land. And so one thing he wanted to see was a competition between all the ranches. So he invited them to come to the town of Raymond, named after him, to have a competition. So the first rodeo consisted just of two events: not saddle bronc riding, bareback riding, and also steer roping. And there were no prize money. It was just the pride money, you might say, which ranch had the best hands. So that happened in 1902.
And you mentioned how the town of Raymond is actually named after a person named Raymond Knight, who is one of the sons of Jesse Knight, who was a mining owner from Utah. And so what was it that sparked an interest for Raymond to come to Canada?
Okay, we need to go back to Jesse's background. Jesse actually owned the ranch at age 22, just 2 miles west of Payson, Utah. And so he was a rancher at heart. But he got interested in finding ore, like others, in some limestones. And so he felt impressed to go to one certain place, and he and his son started digging, and a month later came upon a large amount of silver. And so he had enough silver and money. He bought out six mining operations, and eventually had $10 million, which was a lot of money back then. And so he had money, and a number of people, of course, would propose different things to him for ventures. And a fellow named John Taylor, who lived up here, and also Charles McCarty, made a proposal to him that he come up in this area and buy a ranch. And so he sent two of his sons, Raymond and Will, up to this area to look over things. And they went back and reported, and then John Taylor and Charles McCarty went down to Utah. And Mr. Knight, Jesse, bought 30,000 acres of land near Spring Coulee. Having invested some money, he decided he'd come up and explore things himself and see it. And when he came up, he was quite enthused. And so he bought another 220,000 acres of land. And so as he came up, he mulled over a request in a talk given by the LDS Church president, where he said, "Men and women of wealth and means, open your vaults and your purses and create employment for those who need the labor." And when he arrived here, he thought about things for a few days and had a clear idea as to what he wanted to do. So he was going to build a sugar factory and create a town. And that he did.
Now, you just mentioned the Latter-day Saints Church in your last answer there. Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of the 1,500 residents of Raymond were LDS church members who immigrated to Canada. And one of the reasons is that there were jobs available with the Raymond Sugar Factory that Jesse Knight started up, right?
That's exactly right. And so it was a new opportunity for people. For example, my great-grandfather, Alonzo McMullin, came here in 1902, so the time the sugar factory was being built. It actually took 2 years to build the sugar factory, creating a lot of jobs. So the town actually went from one person in 1901 to 1,560 or so in 1903 when the sugar factory was complete. So there were a lot of people came because of the jobs.
So you're very well rooted in Raymond's then. That's which is amazing to hear. Now Jesse Knight also made a stipulation that the town of Raymond was to be free from alcohol, and it's very interesting that this is still the case today in Raymond.
Yeah, it was in our charter for, it was a charter for 99 years. And alternatives have been discussed in the community. And the decision is made that as of now, that will be the case. Raymond is still a dry town.
And there were also quite a number of Japanese workers who moved to Raymond from BC to work in the sugar beet fields.
Yes, actually, there were Japanese before the Second World War here. The Knight Sugar Company invited people from various places, Japan. My grandfather was in Holland and Belgium, Jim Walker on my mother's side, and invited people from Belgium and Holland to come and work in the sugar beet industry. So there were people prior to the war, but there were about 600 Japanese in southern Alberta prior to the war. With the internment of the Japanese people by the Canadian government offshore of BC, then many of them were in internment camps, and often the men were sent off to work somewhere. Well, a fellow named William Russell, who was part of what was called the colonization office associated with the Lethbridge Northern Irrigation District, he wrote a letter to the government of Canada saying that if there were Japanese people, whole families who would like to come in the sugar beet industry, they would be welcome here. And so, come the end of the Second World War, in fact, I'll tell you this, a fellow named Toro Iwasa, who served in the war, he wrote about this and he said, prior to the war, there were about 600 Japanese in Alberta. And he said, when I came home, there were 3,600. So there were a lot of Japanese people who came. When I was growing up in Raymond, it was not unusual to have 4 or 5 Japanese students in our class. They were just our friends. It was just normal for us.
And how are some of these Japanese families thriving in southern Alberta?
Well, when they first came, it was a challenging situation, but of course, the Japanese people are industrious and hardworking, and were by and large very well received, and worked hard and saved money, and many of them bought their own farms, and were great farmers. Our potato industry, was founded largely on the backs of the Japanese farmers. You went, say, to McCain's or something, you'd see a Japanese flag flying there as well. It gave us inroads into markets for southern Alberta products as well.
Now, people will recognize the names William Lethbridge, Nicholas Sharon, and Elliot Galt as historical coal mining figures associated with establishing the city of Lethbridge. You say there was an interesting connection between these men and Jesse Knight. Can you share a bit about this?
Sure, it is kind of an interesting story. I'd like to tell you the long one, but I'll have to tell you the short version. So basically, Elliot Galt connected with Nicholas Sharon because Nicholas Sharon ran a ferry and also took coal and sold it in Fort Macleod to the RCMP. And Elliot got some coal, assayed it, and it was very good. And so he persuaded his father to create a coal mining business. And they got investment from England, which included and had business associates, which included William Lethbridge, a guy named Coots Burdett, another one whose name was Sterling. Anyway, a number of our towns are named after these folks. And so the Galts needed to ship their coal. They tried it on barges. Of course, that didn't work on the Old Man River in the summer. And then they built railroads to ship the coal primarily to Medicine Hat, Dunsmore, where the railroads would fuel and water up because they were steam locomotives, and also a railroad down into by Great Falls. The federal government gave them 6 sections of land, so about 3,840 acres, I think it is, for every mile of railroad they built. So the Galts had huge tracts of land, and the land was of no value to them unless they could sell it. So ranchers would pay pennies, settlers would pay dollars. But to get settlers here, you need water. And so the Galts connected with Charles Oricard and John W. Taylor, and they had Eliot's brother-in-law, Charles McGrath, was in charge of selling the land. They made 11 trips to Utah to persuade the LDS Church to build the irrigation system. And after 2 years of work, that system was built, going from Kimball to Raymond and Sterling. And when that 2 years was up, then these people had no employment. And so when Jesse Knight came up, there were quite a few people already available to work in the factory and to help to build it. So that maybe that's a bit of a long story, but that's how it's all connected.
Well, I was actually going to go into the irrigation system that we enjoy here in southern Alberta, because it actually did come about at the hands of the early LDS church settlers in Raymond and Carson areas. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Sure. Charles Oricard and the people in Carson diverted water out of Lee's Creek and irrigated about 800 acres quite successfully. So when the Galts wanted to get water, they knew who to talk to in the first place. And so it was with some persuasion that the LDS people came to Alberta, because they just had settled finally after being back east to the United States and now settled in Utah. So, but they received a call from the church to come up here and build the irrigation system. Many of them settled in the town of McGrath. And McGrath has a great irrigation museum there. But the people then would use horses. There were 200 teams of horses. And they would plow the sides of hills and use what's called slip scrapers, half-yard scrapers, and move the soil to the other side of the hill and form what was called one-sided canals. And then they did other movement of dirt. And then they built the structures out of wood. So this was a 2-year process for them to actually get the water from Kimball, which is south and a bit west of Carson, all the way to Raymond and Sterling.
That's amazing. And to our viewers, just a quick reminder that the Raymond Stampede Rodeo will take place on Saturday at 6 p.m. and again at 2 p.m. on Monday, along with all kinds of other events, including the parade at 10 a.m. on Canada Day, as well as fireworks at 11 p.m. You can see the schedule at www.raymond.ca. Ron McMullin is the president of the Raymond Historical Society. Ron, this has been really interesting to hear from you. Thank you so much for sharing some things about the history of Raymond.
Well, thank you so much. And if you come to Raymond and go to the parade, you'll see my house has flowers out front. You'll know which one has a long flower bed. Wave hello. I'll be glad to see you.
I will look out for those flowers. I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.